Hey guys, welcome back to another deep dive into history's strangest lingering habits. Tonight we're talking about medieval rules that somehow, inexplicably, survived the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, 2 world wars, and the invention of the internet. These aren't quaint traditions. They're legal requirements, social expectations, and bizarre protocols that made sense in 1347, but absolutely do not make sense now. And yet, here we are, still doing them. Before we get into the madness, take a second to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy discovering that most of modern civilization is just medieval nonsense with better lighting. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what outdated rule drives you the most insane. I genuinely love hearing from you all. Now settle in, because we're about to unpack centuries of institutional weirdness that refuses to die. Let's start with something you've probably never questioned. Why do we still measure things in feet and inches? The answer is medieval, and it's dumber than you think. The imperial measurement system, feet, inches, yards, miles, didn't emerge from scientific reasoning or mathematical elegance. It emerged from body parts, literally. A foot was the length of a man's foot. An inch was the width of a thumb. A yard was the distance from King Henry I's nose to his outstretched fingertip. These weren't standardized, they were vibes. If the king had short arms, well, your yard was shorter that year. Good luck building a cathedral. The problem was obvious. Every region, every lord, every guild had slightly different measurements. A bolt of cloth in London might be different from a bolt in York. Trade was a nightmare. Construction projects were worse. Imagine trying to coordinate a multi-story stone building when nobody agrees on what a foot actually is. Eventually, England tried to standardize things. In 1266, King Henry III declared that 3 grains of barley laid end to end made an inch, which is great if you have very uniform barley and infinite patience. Spoiler, medieval people had neither. But here's the kicker. In 1791, France introduced the metric system. It was revolutionary, literally. Based on the Earth's circumference divisible by 10, universally applicable. It was elegant, logical, and spread across Europe like wildfire. Most of the world adopted it, except the United States. And why? Because by the time the metric system was being promoted internationally, America was deep into its we do things our own way era. There were proposals to switch. Thomas Jefferson was into it. But inertia won. The infrastructure was built. The tools were manufactured. The textbooks were printed. Changing would be expensive and annoying. So now, in the 21st century, Americans still measure highway distances in miles, buy soda in ounces, and cook using cups and tablespoons, all while the rest of the world uses litres, meters, and grams. NASA has to do conversions. Engineers have to maintain 2 sets of tools. It's inefficient, it's confusing, and it's entirely because a medieval king thought his foot was a good reference point. We're still using a measurement system based on royal body parts, because nobody wanted to admit that switching would be hard. That's it. That's the reason. Now let's talk about something even weirder. Why we still wear neckties. The necktie, that decorative strip of silk you strangle yourself with before job interviews, didn't start as fashion. It started as a military identifier in the 17th century, but its roots go deeper, back to medieval neckcloths and status symbols. In medieval Europe, what you wore around your neck signaled who you were. Priests wore clerical collars. Nobles wore ruffled collars or ornate scarves. Peasants wore nothing, because why waste fabric on decoration when you're covered in mud and despair? By the 1600s, Croatian mercenaries fighting in the 30 Years' War wore distinctive knotted scarves. French King Louis XIV thought they looked sharp and adopted the style for his court. The cravat was born. It became a symbol of refinement, wealth, and the kind of person who had servants to tie complicated knots. Fast forward through centuries of evolving fashion, and the necktie became standard business attire. By the 20th century, wearing a tie meant you were serious, professional, trustworthy. Not wearing one, you were a rebel, a slob, or possibly unemployed. But here's the thing, the necktie serves no function. It doesn't keep you warm. It doesn't protect anything. If anything, it's a liability. It gets caught in machinery, dipped in soup, grabbed in fights, and restricts blood flow to your brain just enough to make you wonder why you're wearing it. Studies have shown that neckties can reduce cognitive function, increase intraocular pressure, and contribute to tension headaches. They're literally making us dumber and more uncomfortable, and yet, walk into a corporate law firm or a banking office without one, and people will question your professionalism. We're still wearing a medieval status symbol turned 17th century military decoration, because somewhere along the way, society decided that looking slightly strangled equals competence. Some companies are finally abandoning dress codes. Tech companies led the charge. But in 2025, there are still courtrooms, boardrooms, and upscale restaurants where a man without a tie is considered underdressed. It's a strip of fabric around your neck, for no reason. And we've all just agreed to keep doing it. Let's move from what we wear to how we eat. Specifically, why do we still use forks the way we do? The fork arrived in medieval Europe fashionably late. For most of the Middle Ages, people ate with knives, spoons in their hands. Forks were considered effeminate, unnecessary, and possibly heretical. When a Byzantine princess brought a golden fork to Venice in the 11th century, a local priest condemned her for excessive refinement. When she died of plague shortly after, he called it divine punishment for her vanity. Forks didn't catch on in England until the 17th century, and even then, people mocked them. Real men used their hands. Forks were for the weak, the foreign, the overly delicate, but eventually forks became standard, and with them came rules, etiquette rules, medieval-rooted, class-based, utterly arbitrary rules about how to hold them, which hand to use, and what angle constitutes proper dining. In Europe, you hold the fork in your left hand, tines down, and the knife in your right. You cut, you stab, you eat. You don't switch hands. That's the continental style, and it's efficient. In America, you hold the fork in your left hand to cut, then switch it to your right hand, tines up, to eat. This is called the American or zigzag style. It's slower, more awkward, and makes no logical sense. Why the difference? Class signaling. In the 18th and 19th centuries, switching hands showed you had time. You weren't shoveling food. You were dining, leisurely, with manners. The American upper class adopted it to prove they were refined, even though it's objectively less efficient. To this day, etiquette guides still teach the zigzag method. Emily Post included it. Miss Manners defends it. And millions of Americans still switch their fork from hand to hand, mid-meal, because a medieval European idea of refinement got tangled up with 19th century American social climbing. There's no practical reason for it. None. But if you don't do it at a formal dinner, someone's grandmother might judge you, and that's apparently enough to keep a terrible system alive. Here's one that affects your sleep schedule. The concept of the work week. You work 5 days. You rest 2. That's normal, right? Wrong. It's medieval. And it wasn't designed for your health or happiness. In medieval Europe, the church controlled the calendar. Sunday was the Lord's Day. You didn't work. You went to church. Skipping it could get you fined, publicly shamed, or worse. But here's the thing. Medieval peasants also had saints' days. Lots of them. Depending on the region, there were 50 to 80 saints' days per year where work was forbidden. So medieval peasants actually worked fewer days annually than modern Americans. They worked hard, brutal, sunrise to sundown labor, but they had built-in breaks. The Church mandated it. Then came the Reformation. Protestants, particularly Calvinists, hated saints' days, idle hands, devil's workshop, all that. They wanted a streamlined calendar with fewer holidays and more productivity. The 6-day work week became standard. Work Monday through Saturday, rest on Sunday. Done. This carried into the Industrial Revolution. Factory owners loved it. 6 days of labour, 1 day of mandatory church. Perfect. Workers, not so much. They were exhausted. Labour movements formed. Strikes happened. And slowly, grudgingly, the concept of the 2-day weekend emerged. Henry Ford popularised it in the 1920s, not out of kindness, but because he realised well-rested workers were more productive. Plus, they had time to spend money on weekends, which boosted consumerism. Capitalism and labour rights accidentally aligned. But the structure, 5 days on, 2 days off, is arbitrary. There's no biological reason humans need exactly 2 rest days after exactly 5 work days. Some countries are experimenting with 4-day work weeks, and finding productivity stays the same, or improves. And yet, the 5-day work week remains the global standard. Why? Because it's what we inherited from medieval church schedules, filtered through Protestant work ethic and Industrial Revolution greed. We're still structuring our entire lives around a calendar designed to maximize church attendance and factory output in the 1500s. You're tired on Monday because medieval priests decided Sunday was holy and factory owners decided 6 days of labour was godly. That's it. Let's talk about something that affects how you buy a home: land measurement and property law. Ever heard of a perch or a rod or a chain? These are real units of measurement still used in property law in some places, and they're medieval. In medieval England, land was measured using rods, literal wooden rods, and chains. A rod was 16.5 feet, a chain was 66 feet, an acre was 10 square chains. Why these numbers? No good reason. They were based on the tools surveyors had, and the distances oxen could plough. When England colonised America, they brought these measurements with them. Surveyors used Gunter's chain, a 66-foot metal chain with 100 links, to measure property. The system was clunky, but it worked. Land deeds were written, boundaries were established, infrastructure was built, and then it just stayed. Today, if you buy property in the United States, the deed might reference rods, chains, and perches. Legal descriptions still use them. Surveyors still reference them. Some states have digitized records, but the underlying measurements are medieval. This causes problems. Modern GPS and laser surveying are precise to millimeters. Medieval chains were precise to close enough. Boundary disputes happen constantly because historical surveys were done with rods that warped in humidity and chains that stretched over time. There have been efforts to switch to metric or decimal systems for land measurement. They've mostly failed. Why? Because changing property law is a legal nightmare. Every deed, every title, every easement would need to be converted. Lawyers would have a field day. Politicians don't want to touch it. So we're stuck with a system where your property line might be described as 30 rods north of the old oak tree, thence westerly along the creek to a pile of stones. Never mind that the oak tree died in 1987 and the creek moved during a flood. Good luck in court. Medieval land measurement persists because updating it would require admitting that legal systems can be wrong, and that's apparently harder than just keeping a broken system running. Now, let's talk about how you address people. Specifically, why some people still get called Your Honour or Your Grace. Medieval Europe was obsessed with hierarchy. Everyone had a rank. Peasant, freeman, knight, baron, earl, duke, king, and each rank had a specific form of address. You couldn't just call a duke Steve. Well, you could, but you'd regret it. These titles weren't just polite, they were legal. Addressing someone incorrectly could be seen as insubordination or even treason. The whole system was designed to reinforce social order. You are below me, and language will remind you every single time we speak. Kings were Your Majesty. Dukes and duchesses were Your Grace. Lords and ladies were My Lord or My Lady. Judges, as representatives of royal authority, were Your Worship, or later, Your Honour. This wasn't about respect, it was about power. The titles created distance. They reminded everyone that the person in charge wasn't just another human. They were elevated, chosen by God, by birth, by the system. And then most of the world moved on. We had revolutions, republics formed, monarchies fell or became ceremonial, aristocracy faded. We decided mostly that people were just people, except in courtrooms. Walk into a court in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and you still have to call the judge Your Honour. In the UK, it's sometimes My Lord or My Lady if it's a High Court judge. Fail to use the title, you can be held in contempt. This isn't about respect for the individual, it's about respect for the position. But the position is a medieval holdover. Judges aren't appointed by God. They're appointed by elected officials or other judges. They're civil servants. They went to law school. They're doing a job. And yet, we still use the language of feudal hierarchy to address them. In some courts, you have to stand when the judge enters. You have to ask permission to speak. You can't argue too forcefully, or you're disrespecting the court. It's theatre, medieval theatre, designed to remind you that in this room, the person in the robe has power, and you don't. Some argue it maintains decorum. Others argue it's an unnecessary relic that reinforces class divisions. Either way, it's weird. You can call your doctor by their first name. You can call your senator by their first name if you meet them. But call a judge Bob in court, and you're getting fined. We're still using medieval titles because legal systems are conservative by nature, and nobody wants to be the one to say, hey, maybe we don't need to LARP as feudal subjects every time we have a traffic hearing. Let's shift to something that affects your actual freedom, why we still have bail systems. Bail, the idea that you can pay money to get out of jail while awaiting trial, is a medieval English invention. And like most medieval inventions, it was designed to benefit the rich. In medieval England, if you were accused of a crime, you could be held in a dungeon indefinitely until your trial. Dungeons were not pleasant. They were cold, wet, disease-ridden holes where people died of typhus before they ever saw a judge. So the system developed bail. If you could pay a sum of money, or if someone could vouch for you, a pledge, you'd be released until trial. If you fled, the money was forfeited. If you showed up, you got it back. In theory, this was fair. In practice, it was a class system. Rich people paid and went home. Poor people rotted in dungeons. The British brought this system to America. It was enshrined in the Eighth Amendment. Excessive bail shall not be required. Notice it. Doesn't say bail is mandatory or even good, it just says it shouldn't be excessive, which is vague and nearly useless. Fast forward to 2025. The bail system is still here, and it's still a class system. If you're arrested and bail is set at $50,000, you have options if you're wealthy. You pay it, you get out. If you're poor, you're stuck. You can't pay. You sit in jail. You lose your job. Your kids lose their parent. Your life unravels. All before you've been convicted of anything. Bail bond companies emerge to help. You pay them 10% of the bail, non-refundable, and they cover the rest. Sounds helpful, except it's predatory. You still lose money, even if you're found innocent. And if you can't afford even 10%, you're still in jail. Studies show that people who can't afford bail are more likely to plead guilty, even if they're innocent, just to get out of jail faster. They're more likely to lose jobs, housing, and custody of children. The system punishes poverty, not crime. Some states are trying to reform it. New York, California, and New Jersey have moved toward cashless bail systems for non-violent offences. But nationwide, the medieval system persists. Why? Because bail bond companies lobby hard. They're a billion-dollar industry. And because there's a pervasive belief that bail works, even though data shows it doesn't reduce flight risk or improve public safety. We're still using a medieval system designed for a world where people lived in the same village their whole lives, and public shaming was an effective deterrent. We live in a globalized, digitized society with ankle monitors, GPS tracking, and databases. We have better options, but we don't use them, because changing a system is hard, and benefiting the rich while punishing the poor is easier. Here's one that affects your mail: why we still have a postal monopoly. In medieval Europe, carrying messages was a royal privilege. Kings had couriers. The church had messengers. Nobles had servants. Regular people. They waited or they walked. By the 15th century, European monarchs realized that controlling the mail meant controlling information. Letters could be intercepted, read, censored. Intelligence could be gathered. So royal postal services were established, and private mail carriers were often illegal. England formalised this in 1516 under Henry VIII. The Royal Mail was created, and it was a crime for anyone else to carry letters for profit. The government had a monopoly. This wasn't about service. It was about surveillance and control. When America was founded, it adopted a similar system. The U.S. Postal Service was established in 1775, and the Constitution gave Congress the power to create post offices and post roads. Over time, laws were passed, making it illegal for private companies to deliver letters to mailboxes. Yes, your mailbox. That box at the end of your driveway. Legally, it belongs to the USPS. It's a federal crime for anyone other than a postal worker or the homeowner to put mail in it. FedEx and UPS can't use it. Your neighbour can't use it. If Amazon leaves a package inside your mailbox instead of beside it, technically that's illegal. This made sense in 1775. Mail delivery was essential infrastructure. The government needed to ensure it reached everyone, even in remote areas. Private companies would only serve profitable routes. But in 2025, FedEx, UPS, and Amazon deliver everywhere, often faster and cheaper than USPS. Email exists, texting exists. Most mail is junk anyway, and yet the monopoly persists. The USPS is legally protected from competition in first-class mail. Private companies can deliver packages but not letters. Why? Because the postal unions lobby hard, and because there's a romantic notion that mail delivery is a public good that must be protected. Is it still a public good? Debatable. The USPS loses billions annually. Service has declined. But the monopoly remains, rooted in a medieval idea that the government must control the flow of information. We're still protecting a system designed to help kings spy on their subjects, because we've convinced ourselves that mail delivery is too important to let the free market handle, even though the free market is already handling most of it. Let's talk about something you've definitely experienced: why job applications still ask for references. The concept of a reference, someone who vouches for your character and competence, goes back to medieval guild systems. In medieval Europe, if you wanted to work as a blacksmith, carpenter, or baker, you joined a guild. Guilds controlled who could practice a trade. To join, you needed an apprenticeship. To get an apprenticeship, you needed a master craftsman to sponsor you. This sponsorship was serious. The master was vouching for you. If you screwed up, it reflected on them. If you succeeded, it validated their judgment. Your reputation was tied to theirs. This made sense in a world where everyone lived in the same town forever. Reputations mattered. You couldn't just move to another city and start fresh. Well, you could, but you'd be an outsider, and good luck getting work. The guild system faded, but the concept of references stuck. By the 19th century, letters of recommendation were standard for professional jobs. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, all needed someone to vouch for them. Then came the modern job application. And with it, the references section. List 3 people who can speak to your work ethic and character. Preferably former supervisors. Preferably not your mum. Here's the problem. References are mostly useless. First, nobody lists a bad reference. You only list people you know will say nice things. So employers aren't getting honest assessments, they're getting curated endorsements. Second, most reference checks are cursory. HR calls, asks a few questions, checks a box. Unless the reference actively sabotages you, which is rare because of legal liability, you're fine. Third, former employers often refuse to give detailed references. They confirm employment dates and job title. That's it. Anything more opens them up to lawsuits. So why do companies still ask? Tradition, liability coverage, the illusion of thoroughness. It's a medieval relic that survives because nobody wants to be the company that skips it and then hires someone terrible. Some companies are moving towards skills testing, portfolio reviews, and trial projects. These actually measure ability. But most still ask for references, dutifully call them, learn nothing useful, and hire based on gut feeling anyway. We're still asking people to vouch for us like we're joining a 14th century blacksmith guild, because HR departments are afraid to admit that the whole process is security theatre. Now, let's talk about something that affects students everywhere, why we still have summer break. Summer, vacation, that glorious 3-month stretch of freedom, isn't about learning. It's about farming, medieval farming. In agrarian societies, children worked. Planting season in spring, harvest season in fall. Families needed every available hand. Schools, where they existed, scheduled around this. Classes ran in winter when there was less farm work, and in midsummer during a lull between planting and harvest. As public schooling developed in the 19th century, this pattern persisted. Rural schools followed agricultural calendars. Urban schools, interestingly, often ran year-round with shorter, more frequent breaks. But as America urbanized, a weird thing happened. Wealthy families started leaving cities in the summer. Heat, disease, pollution. It was miserable. If you could afford it, you went to the countryside. And you took your kids. Schools adapted. Summer break became standard, partly to accommodate wealthy families, partly because school buildings weren't air-conditioned, and partly because the agrarian calendar was still culturally dominant even as fewer families actually farmed. By the early 20th century, summer break was entrenched, and then everyone forgot why. Today, less than 2% of Americans work in agriculture. Air conditioning exists. We have the technology to run schools year-round, and yet we don't. Why? Tradition, childcare logistics, the tourism industry, camps, resorts, summer programs. They all depend on summer break. Changing it would disrupt billions in revenue. Educationally, summer break is a disaster. Students forget material. Summer slide is real. Teachers spend the first month of school reteaching what was lost. Low-income students suffer the most because they don't have access to enrichment programs. Some schools have switched to year-round calendars with shorter, more frequent breaks. Data shows students retain more, teachers burn out less, and families adapt fine. But most schools haven't switched, because parents expect summer break. Politicians don't want to anger parents. And the calendar lobby, yes, there's a lobby, fights any change. We're still giving kids 3 months off in summer because medieval peasants needed help harvesting wheat, and wealthy Victorians wanted to escape cholera outbreaks. Neither reason applies anymore. But try telling that to a parent who's already booked a beach house in July. Let's talk about something that affects your name, why we still have middle names. The concept of multiple given names is medieval, rooted in Christian baptism practices. In early medieval Europe, most people had one name: John, Mary, William. That's it. If you needed to distinguish between two Johns, you'd add a descriptor. John the blacksmith, John from the hill, John the short. But as populations grew and people moved around more, one name wasn't enough. The Catholic Church encouraged multiple baptismal names, often naming children after saints for spiritual protection. By the late Middle Ages, it was common for nobility to have several names. It signalled status. Peasants had one name, lords had 3 or 4. This practice spread. By the 17th century, middle names were common among the European upper class. When colonists came to America, they brought the tradition. But here's the thing. Middle names serve no practical function. They don't prevent identity confusion. Social security numbers do that. They don't provide legal clarity. Your first and last name do that. They exist purely as tradition, a leftover from medieval Christendom that we've kept because, well, because. And yet we've built systems around them. Legal documents ask for them. Passports require them. School forms demand them. If you don't have a middle name, you sometimes have to write NMN, no middle name, to prove you're not hiding something. Some cultures don't use middle names at all. Iceland uses patronymics. Many Asian cultures use family name first, but Western bureaucracy assumes you have one, and if you have multiple middle names, good luck fitting them on a form. We're still giving children medieval baptismal names because the Catholic Church thought it would protect them from demons, and now every online form has a middle initial field that serves no purpose except making databases slightly more complicated. Here's one that affects how you speak. Why we still say "bless you" when someone sneezes. This one is pure medieval superstition, and it survived entirely through social autopilot. In medieval Europe, sneezing was dangerous. Not because of germs, they didn't know about germs, but because people believed your soul could escape through your nose during a sneeze. Seriously. The prevailing theory was that a sneeze was so violent it could temporarily dislodge your soul, leaving you vulnerable to demonic possession. Saying "God bless you" was meant to protect you during that split second of spiritual vulnerability. Alternatively, sneezing was seen as an early sign of plague. During the Black Death, a sneeze could mean you'd be dead in days. "Bless you" was both prayer and preemptive farewell. Either way, the phrase stuck. It became automatic, a social reflex. You sneeze, someone blesses you, you don't even think about it. And here's the weird part, we still do it, in 2025. When we know souls don't escape through noses and sneezing is just your body expelling irritants. Different cultures have different versions. Germans say Gesundheit, health. Spanish speakers say Salud, health. But the instinct is the same. Acknowledge the sneeze. What's bizarre is how mandatory it feels. If you sneeze in public and nobody says anything, it's awkward. If someone sneezes and you don't say, "bless you," you feel rude. Why? There's no logical reason. It's not polite to acknowledge every bodily function. We don't say, "bless you," when someone coughs, hiccups, or burps, usually. But sneezing must be acknowledged. Some people have tried to phase it out. Rationalists argue it's superstitious nonsense. Germophobes point out that saying "bless you" often requires getting closer to the person, which spreads germs. And yet, the tradition persists. because it's polite, because it's expected, because your grandmother would be disappointed if you didn't. We're still blessing people's sneezes to protect them from demons and plague because medieval Europeans didn't understand respiratory systems, and we've collectively decided that stopping would be weirder than continuing. Let's talk about something that affects your legal rights. Why trial by jury still exists. Trial by jury, the idea that regular citizens should decide guilt or innocence, is a medieval English invention, and it started for reasons that have nothing to do with justice. In early medieval Europe, guilt was determined by ordeal: trial by fire, trial by water, trial by combat. The idea was that God would protect the innocent. If you could hold a red-hot iron and not get burned, you were innocent. If you drowned when thrown in a river, you were innocent, but dead. So, posthumous exoneration. This was obviously insane, but it was accepted because people genuinely believed God intervened in human affairs constantly. By the 12th century, the Church started getting uncomfortable with this. The Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 forbade clergy from participating in trials by ordeal. Suddenly, the legal system needed a new way to determine guilt. Enter the jury. Originally, juries weren't neutral. They were local people who already knew the accused and the facts. They were witnesses and judges combined. You hoped they liked you. Over time, the system evolved. Juries became neutral. They were presented with evidence. They deliberated. They reached a verdict. It was a massive improvement over trial by fire. England exported this system to its colonies, including America. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to a jury trial. It's considered a cornerstone of justice. But here's the problem. Modern juries are kind of a mess. Jurors are selected randomly. They have no legal training. They're expected to understand complex evidence, forensic science, and legal standards. They're not paid well. They're often bored, confused, or biased. Lawyers manipulate them. Voir dire, the jury selection process, is basically a game of finding jurors who are subtly biased in your favour while pretending to seek impartiality, and the results are inconsistent. The same evidence presented to two different juries can yield opposite verdicts. That's not justice. That's randomness. Many countries have moved away from juries. Most of Europe uses professional judges or mixed panels of judges and laypeople. Japan uses a mixed system. These systems are faster, more consistent, and less susceptible to emotional manipulation. But America clings to juries. Why? Tradition. Mistrust of government. The romantic notion that a jury of your peers is the ultimate protection against tyranny. Is it? Debatable. Juries have acquitted lynch mobs and convicted innocent people. They're as fallible as any system. Some argue juries are still valuable because they bring community standards into the courtroom. Others argue they're an inefficient relic that survives because lawyers, who control the system, benefit from their unpredictability. We're still using a medieval alternative to trial by fire because we've convinced ourselves that 12 random people with no training are the best judges of truth, even though data suggests professional judges are more accurate and consistent. Now let's talk about something that affects how you get married. Why we still have wedding traditions rooted in property law. Medieval marriage wasn't about love. It was about property, alliances, and bloodlines. And many modern wedding traditions are fossilized remnants of that system. Take the engagement ring. The tradition of giving a ring to signal betrothal dates back to medieval Europe. But it wasn't romantic. It was a down payment. In a world where women couldn't own property or work most jobs, marriage was their economic survival. If a man broke an engagement, the woman's reputation was ruined. No one else would marry her. She'd be destitute. So the ring was insurance. It was valuable. If he backed out, she could sell it and survive. It was a financial transaction, not a symbol of love. The diamond engagement ring specifically is even more modern and cynical. That tradition was invented by De Beers in the 1930s with the slogan, "A diamond is forever." It was marketing. Before that, engagement rings could be any gemstone or just a simple band. But because De Beers successfully linked diamonds to love and commitment, we now have a cultural expectation that you should spend 2 months' salary, another De Beers invention, on a rock. Then there's giving away the bride. In medieval marriages, women were property, literally. The father owned his daughter until she married, then her husband owned her. The wedding ceremony was a transfer of ownership. The father walked his daughter down the aisle and handed her to the groom. That's what giving away meant. A property transaction. Modern weddings have softened the language. Now it's about honouring tradition or a father's love. But the underlying structure is the same. The bride is escorted by a male relative and handed off to another man. Some brides have rejected this. They walk alone, or with both parents, or skip the aisle entirely. But many still do it because it's traditional, without realizing they're reenacting a medieval property exchange. And then there's the white wedding dress. This one isn't medieval, it's Victorian. Queen Victoria wore white in 1840 and it became fashionable. Before that, brides wore their best dress, whatever colour it was. But the white dress signified purity and virginity. Another way of signalling to the groom that he was getting unused goods. The whole thing was about commodifying women's bodies. Today, white dresses are standard, even though most brides aren't virgins, and the colour has lost its original meaning. It's just what you wear. Because Queen Victoria did it 185 years ago. We're still performing medieval property transactions and Victorian purity rituals at weddings, because the wedding industry profits from tradition, and questioning it makes you sound like a killjoy. Let's talk about something that affects your living situation. Why we still have homeowners associations, HOAs, with medieval-style covenants. HOAS, those neighbourhood organisations that fine you for painting your house the wrong shade of beige, are rooted in medieval English property law, specifically restrictive covenants. In medieval England, land ownership came with obligations. If you held land from a lord, you owed him service, rent, or both. If you sold the land, the obligations transferred to the new owner. These were called covenants, and they ran with the land. Over time, covenants evolved. They weren't just about feudal obligations. They became tools for controlling how land was used. A landowner could sell property but restrict what the buyer could do with it. No building a tannery, no operating a brothel, no painting your house purple. These restrictive covenants were enforceable in court, and they transferred to future owners. You could buy a property and discover decades later that there's a covenant from 1823 prohibiting you from keeping pigs. When suburbs exploded in post-World War II America, developers used covenants to maintain property values and aesthetic uniformity. They created HOAs to enforce them. Initially, many of these covenants were racist. They explicitly prohibited selling to black families, Jews, or other minorities. These racial covenants were ruled unenforceable in 1948, but the HOA structure remained. Modern HOAs still use covenants. When you buy a home in an HOA, you sign a contract agreeing to follow the rules. These rules can be absurdly specific. Grass height, fence colour, holiday decoration limits, what kind of mailbox you can have, and if you violate them, fines, liens, foreclosure. Yes, an HOA can foreclose on your house if you don't pay fines for leaving your trash cans out too long. The logic is that these rules protect property values, and statistically they do. Homes in HOAs often sell for more, but they're also a medieval system of control. You own your property, but not really. You're subject to rules created by your neighbours, enforced by a board of busybodies, rooted in covenants that run with the land forever. Some people love HOAs. They like the order, the maintained landscaping, the uniformity. Others hate them. They feel like modern serfdom. Either way, you can't escape them. In many cities, the majority of new housing is in HOAs. If you want to buy a home, you accept the covenants. We're still binding property owners to eternal restrictive agreements because medieval English lords wanted to control what peasants did with their land, and modern developers realised they could use the same legal structure to enforce aesthetic conformity in the suburbs. Here's one that affects your healthcare: why medical professionals still take the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath, that ancient pledge to do no harm, dates back to ancient Greece, around 400 BCE. It's older than medieval, but it survived through medieval medical schools and remains in use today. The original oath included promises like, don't give deadly drugs even if asked, don't perform abortions, don't sleep with patients or their families, don't reveal patient secrets, honour your teachers like your parents. Some of these are still relevant. Patient confidentiality is important. Not sleeping with patients is a good call. But the original oath also swore by Apollo, Asclepius, and a bunch of Greek gods. It forbade surgery, which was considered beneath a physician. Surgeons were barbers. It banned abortion under all circumstances. Modern medicine doesn't align with this. Doctors perform surgery. Medical ethics recognise situations where ending a pregnancy is necessary. We don't worship Apollo. So medical schools updated it. There are modern versions. Some schools wrote their own. Some dropped it entirely. But many schools still use a version of the Hippocratic Oath. Why? Tradition. Symbolism. The gravitas of swearing an ancient pledge. Here's the problem. The oath is non-binding. It has no legal force. Doctors who violate it aren't punished unless they also violate actual laws or medical board regulations. It's theatre. A ritual that makes medicine feel noble and ancient, but doesn't actually govern behaviour. What does govern behaviour? Medical licensing boards, malpractice law, hospital policies, professional ethics codes. These are enforceable. The Hippocratic Oath is a nice gesture, but it's functionally irrelevant. And yet, medical schools keep using it because it connects modern doctors to an ancient tradition, even though that tradition included bloodletting, for humour theory, and a ban on surgery. We're still swearing oaths to Greek gods and pre-scientific medical principles because it makes the profession feel timeless and sacred, even though the actual medicine has completely changed. Let's talk about something that affects your money. Why we still have coins. Physical currency, especially coins, is a medieval and older technology that refuses to die despite being objectively worse than digital payment in almost every way. Coins were practical in medieval times. They were durable, hard to counterfeit, sort of, and universally accepted. Paper money didn't exist yet in Europe. Coins were the only option. But in 2025, coins are a logistical nightmare. They're expensive to produce. A penny costs more than 1 cent to make. The US Mint loses money on every penny and nickel it produces. They're heavy. Carrying change is annoying. Vending machines jam. Counting coins takes time. They're unsanitary. Studies show coins carry bacteria, viruses, and sometimes fecal matter. Delightful, and they're increasingly useless. Most transactions are digital. Credit cards, debit cards, phone payments. They're faster, more convenient, and trackable. Several countries have recognized this. Sweden is nearly cashless. Canada eliminated the penny. Australia and New Zealand have ditched small coins. But America clings to them. Why? Lobbying? The zinc industry profits from pennies. They're mostly zinc. Coinstar and other change-counting companies profit from the inconvenience. Vending machine manufacturers resist change, pun intended. Nostalgia. People have emotional attachments to coins. Find a penny, pick it up. Coin collections, piggy banks. There's cultural weight, distrust of digital. Some people worry about surveillance, hacking, or losing access to money if systems fail. These aren't entirely unreasonable, but they're also not sufficient reason to keep producing billions of coins that cost more to make than they're worth. And let's not forget the environmental cost. Mining zinc and copper, minting coins, transporting them. It's resource intensive. For what? So you can have a jar of pennies on your dresser that you'll never spend? We're still using medieval-era physical tokens for commerce because industries profit from inefficiency and people are sentimental about jingling sounds in their pockets. Now, let's talk about something that affects your food. Why restaurants still use tipping. Tipping, the practice of giving extra money directly to service workers, has medieval European roots. But it exploded in America for uniquely terrible reasons. In medieval Europe, lords and wealthy patrons would occasionally give extra money to servants as a reward for good service. It was called a gratuity, from the Latin gratuitus, meaning freely given. This wasn't expected, it was a bonus. Servants were paid wages. Tips were extra. When the practice came to America, it was initially rejected. Americans saw tipping as aristocratic and undemocratic. You pay for the service. That's it. But after the Civil War, restaurants and railroads realized they could exploit tipping to avoid paying freed black workers full wages. Work for tips, they said. If you're good, you'll make money. This allowed businesses to shift labor costs onto customers, and it stuck. By the early 20th century, tipping was standard, and the federal government codified it. The tip credit allows restaurants to pay servers below minimum wage, as low as $2.13 per hour in some states, with the expectation that tips make up the difference. This is insane. No other industry works this way. Can you imagine if your plumber said, I charge $50 per hour, but I only pay my workers $2.13 and they rely on tips from you? But in restaurants, it's normal, expected. If you don't tip, you're the bad guy, even though the system is designed to benefit the employer at the expense of both workers and customers. Servers have inconsistent income. A bad night means poverty. Customers face guilt and confusion. How much to tip? 15%? 18%? 20%? Tip on the pre-tax total or post-tax? What if the service was bad but the server was nice? And it's regressive. Studies show that attractive servers get tipped more. White servers get tipped more than black servers. Women get tipped more if they flirt. It's a system ripe for discrimination. Many countries don't tip. Japan considers it rude. Australia pays servers full wages. France includes service in the bill. America has tried to move away from tipping. Some restaurants have eliminated it, paying higher wages and raising menu prices. Many failed because customers revolted. They didn't want to pay higher prices, even though they were already paying the same amount through tips. We're still using a medieval gratuity system weaponized to exploit emancipated slaves, because restaurants successfully convinced Americans that subsidizing worker wages through social obligation is better than just paying people properly. Let's talk about something that affects how you learn. Why education still uses the lecture format. The lecture, one person talking while many people listen and take notes, is a medieval invention, and it made sense in the 12th century. It makes much less sense now. In medieval universities, books were rare and expensive. They were hand-copied by scribes, and a single book could cost a year's wages. Students couldn't afford them. So professors lectured. They read from their personal copy of a text and explained it. Students took notes. That was the only way to access the information. Lectures were the medieval version of file sharing. The professor had the knowledge. He distributed it verbally. Students captured what they could. But this method has massive drawbacks. It's passive. Students sit and absorb. There's no interaction, no feedback, no confirmation that they understand. It's slow. A professor can only speak so fast. A student can read faster and revisit difficult sections. It's inefficient. If 100 students need the same information, having one person repeat it live 100 times is wasteful, and it's inconsistent. Students miss classes. They mishear. They get distracted. The information transfer is lossy. Then came the printing press. Books became cheap. Then came photocopiers. Then the internet. Now information is free and instant, and yet lectures remain the dominant form of teaching. Walk into most universities and you'll find professors lecturing to rooms of students who are half asleep or on their phones. Why do we still do this? Tradition. Universities are conservative institutions. They change slowly. Scalability. Lectures allow one professor to teach hundreds of students. It's cheaper than small seminars or one-on-one tutoring. Inertia. Professors were taught via lecture. They lecture. The cycle continues. But research consistently shows that active learning, discussions, problem-solving, hands-on work is more effective than passive lectures. Students retain more. They understand deeper. Some schools are changing. Flipped classrooms where students watch lectures online and use class time for discussion. Problem-based learning, peer instruction. But most schools haven't changed because it's easier to keep doing what's always been done. We're still lecturing at students because medieval monks didn't have Xerox machines, and universities decided that tradition is more important than what actually works. Here's one that affects your identity, why we still use signatures. Your signature, that squiggly line that supposedly represents you, is a medieval European concept. And in the age of digital identity, it's nearly useless. In medieval times, most people couldn't read or write, so contracts were sealed with wax and a signet ring. The ring had your family crest or symbol. Pressing it into hot wax proved the document was from you. As literacy spread, written signatures replaced seals. Your signature was unique to you. It was proof of identity and agreement. This made sense in a world where documents were rare, identity theft didn't exist, and handwriting analysis was the cutting edge of forensic science. But in 2025, signatures are easily forged. Studies show that even trained experts can't reliably detect signature forgeries, and most people's signatures are inconsistent anyway. Sign your name 10 times and they'll all look different. Yet, we still require signatures for contracts, credit card purchases, legal documents, medical forms. Why? Legally, a signature indicates intent. It shows you agreed to something, but it's a terrible proof of identity. Credit card companies are phasing out signatures. Most stores don't check them. You could sign Mickey Mouse, and it would go through. Digitally, we have better options. Two-factor authentication, biometrics, digital certificates, blockchain verification, all more secure than a squiggle on paper. But legal systems still require signatures. Real estate transactions require wet signatures, ink on paper. Many contracts aren't valid without one. Electronic signatures, DocuSign, etc., are gaining acceptance, but they're still designed to mimic the old system. You type your name in a cursive font. It's a digital version of a medieval ritual. We're still scribbling our names on paper because medieval nobles pressed rings into wax, and we've decided that muscle memory and ink are somehow more trustworthy than encrypted digital identity, even though they're objectively not. Let's talk about something that affects your justice system. Why we still have the oyez courtroom ritual. If you've ever been in a courtroom or seen a legal drama, you've heard it. Oyez, 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 all rise. This court is now in session. Oyez is French for hear ye. It's a medieval court crier tradition dating back to when most people couldn't read and legal proceedings needed to be announced loudly. In medieval England and France, court criers would stand outside and shout, Oyez, oyez, oyez. Court is in session. Bring forth your grievances. This alerted townspeople that the travelling judge had arrived. Inside the court, the crier would announce the judge's entrance, call for silence, and read proclamations. It was practical. No microphones, no printed schedules. You needed someone to yell. This tradition carried into modern courtrooms. Even though we have microphones, printed dockets, and nobody needs to be summoned from the fields, most American courtrooms still use it. The bailiff or clerk announces, oyez, 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 or sometimes just all rise. Everyone stands. The judge enters. Everyone sits. It's pure theatre. There's no functional reason for it. The judge could just walk in. The proceedings could start. But courts are deeply traditional. The rituals create solemnity, formality, a sense that this is an important ancient institution. Critics argue it's pretentious and exclusionary. The use of archaic French and formal rituals makes courts intimidating, especially for people unfamiliar with the system. Defenders argue it maintains respect for the law. The ceremony reminds everyone that this isn't casual. Rights and freedoms are at stake. But there's a middle ground between no ceremony and medieval cosplay. Courts could maintain respect without requiring everyone to perform a 13th century French ritual every time a judge walks in. We're still shouting oyez in courtrooms because medieval town criers needed to announce court sessions to illiterate peasants, and modern legal systems decided that continuing to do so makes the law seem more legitimate. Now let's talk about something that affects your drink. Why we still toast before drinking. Raising a glass and saying cheers or to your health before drinking is so automatic that most people never question it. But it's rooted in medieval paranoia. In medieval Europe, poisoning was a legitimate concern. Political rivals, jealous spouses, ambitious heirs, anyone with access to your wine could kill you. So trust-building rituals emerged. One was clinking glasses. The theory was that if you clinked hard enough, liquid would slosh from one cup into the other. If everyone drank from the mixed result, nobody was poisoned. Probably. Another theory is that toasting involved eye contact and synchronized drinking. You couldn't discreetly avoid drinking if everyone was watching. The word toast itself comes from a medieval practice of putting a piece of spiced burnt bread in wine to improve the flavour. Medieval wine was often terrible. Drinking to someone's health meant wishing them well, and the toast absorbed some of the wine's acidity. Over time, the poisoning concerns faded, but the ritual stayed. It became a social bonding mechanism, a way to mark a moment, to honour someone, to create collective participation. And it stuck. In 2025, nobody thinks their wine is poisoned, but we still toast. At weddings, birthdays, business dinners, New Year's Eve, it feels wrong to drink without acknowledging the group. Different cultures have different words. Cheers, salud, prost, kanpai, slaint. But the ritual is universal. Is it necessary? No. Does it hurt? Also no. But it's a perfect example of how medieval anxiety about assassination became a social norm that survived because it feels polite. We're still clinking glasses and making eye contact before drinking, because medieval nobles didn't trust each other not to poison the wine, and we've decided that continuing the ritual is friendlier than just drinking. Let's talk about something that affects your government, why we still swear oaths on religious texts. When someone takes office, testifies in court, or becomes a citizen, they often swear an oath. In many places, this involves placing your hand on a Bible. This tradition is deeply medieval. In medieval Europe, oaths were sacred. Breaking an oath meant damnation. Swearing on the Bible made the oath binding not just legally, but spiritually. If you lied under oath, you weren't just committing perjury. You were risking your immortal soul. For a deeply religious society, this was a powerful deterrent. The practice continued in secular courts because it was culturally embedded. Even as societies became less uniformly Christian, the Bible remained the default oath prop. But it creates problems. First, it's religiously exclusive. What if you're Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, atheist? Many courts now allow you to swear on the Torah, Quran, or another text. Some allow affirmations instead of oaths, but the default is still often the Bible. Second, it's performative. Nobody actually believes that touching a Bible makes you more honest. Plenty of people have sworn on Bibles and lied immediately. Third, it's constitutionally questionable. The US Constitution explicitly states that no religious test shall ever be required for public office. Yet the cultural expectation is that you'll swear on a Bible. Some politicians have refused. John Quincy Adams used a law book. Teddy Roosevelt didn't use anything. Keith Ellison, the first Muslim congressman, used Thomas Jefferson's Quran. But these were seen as controversial. The assumption is still that a proper oath involves a religious text. Why? Because medieval Europe couldn't imagine a world where people would be honest without fearing God's judgment. We live in that world now. Secular ethics exist. Legal penalties for perjury exist. The oath itself, the promise, should be enough. But we still bring out the Bible because medieval Christianity convinced everyone that moral behavior was impossible without divine surveillance, and nobody wants to be the politician who looks ungodly by skipping it. Here's one that affects your living. Situation: why landlords still collect first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit. This practice, where tenants pay 2 or 3 months' rent up front before moving in, is rooted in medieval feudal rent collection. In medieval Europe, peasants paid rent to lords, but rent wasn't always money. It was often labour, crops, or goods, and it wasn't always consistent. To ensure they'd get paid, lords developed systems of advance payment. You paid for the current period and guaranteed the next. If you fled, damaged property, or couldn't pay later, the lord already had something. As economies monetized, this evolved into cash deposits. By the 19th century, landlords in cities were requiring advance rent payments. The modern system, first month, last month security deposit, became standard in the 20th century. The logic is, first month, you're paying for the time you're living there. Last month prevents you from skipping out on the final month. Security deposit covers damages. In theory, it protects landlords from bad tenants. In practice, it's a massive barrier to housing. If rent is $2,000 per month, you need $6,000 up front. For low-income people, that's impossible. They can afford monthly rent, but not the lump sum. This keeps people in bad housing situations, prevents economic mobility, and gives landlords enormous power. And landlords often abuse it. Security deposits are supposed to be returned if there's no damage, but landlords often find excuses to keep them. Normal wear and tear becomes damage, cleaning fees, painting fees. By the time they're done, you get nothing back. Some places are reforming this. Rent control laws cap deposits. Some jurisdictions require itemized deduction lists, but enforcement is weak, and the system persists because landlords have power and tenants don't. We're still requiring medieval-style advance tribute from renters because feudal lords needed to ensure peasants wouldn't flee with unpaid debts, and modern landlords realised they could use the same system to collect interest-free loans from desperate tenants. Let's talk about something that affects your knowledge: why libraries still charge late fees. Public libraries, institutions designed to provide free access to information, have long charged fines for returning books late. This policy is rooted in medieval book economics. In medieval times, books were incredibly valuable. A single illuminated manuscript could cost as much as a farm. Libraries, mostly monastery libraries, needed to protect their collections. Books were often chained to desks to prevent theft. Borrowing was rare and required significant trust. If you borrowed a book and didn't return it, you'd face serious consequences. As public libraries emerged in the 19th century, they adopted similar protective policies. Late fees were introduced to incentivize timely returns. The fee wasn't about revenue, it was about ensuring books circulated and didn't disappear into someone's house forever. This made sense when books were scarce and there were waiting lists. But in 2025, the landscape has changed. First, late fees are aggressive. They punish poor people disproportionately. If you're wealthy, a $2 late fee is nothing. If you're struggling, it might prevent you from ever returning to the library. Second, they're counterproductive. Studies show that late fees don't improve return rates. They just keep people away. Someone who owes $10 in late fees might avoid the library for years, keeping the book indefinitely. Third, they cost more to administer than they collect. Processing payments, tracking fines, sending notices, it's expensive. Many libraries have eliminated late fees. San Diego, Chicago, Boston, among others. The results? Return rates stayed the same or improved. Library usage increased, especially among low-income families. Books still come back. Turns out most people are honest. They don't need financial penalties to return books, but many libraries still charge fees. Why? Tradition, the belief that people need consequences. Budget, concerns, even though the fees often cost more to collect than they generate. We're still fining people for late library books because medieval monasteries needed to protect irreplaceable manuscripts, and modern libraries decided that punishing poor people is a reasonable way to encourage timely returns, even though it doesn't work. Finally, let's talk about something that affects your language: why we still capitalize I, but not other pronouns. In English, the first-person singular pronoun I is always capitalized, no matter where it appears in a sentence. This is unique. French doesn't do it. Spanish doesn't. German capitalizes all nouns but treats ich, I, normally. Why does English do this? The answer is medieval typography and linguistic evolution. Old English had ich as the first-person pronoun. It was lowercase. But Middle English transitioned to I, which was a single letter. In medieval manuscripts, single-letter words were often hard to read. They blended into other text or got confused with the letter L or a vertical pen stroke. Scribes started capitalizing I for clarity. It stood out. It was readable. When the printing press arrived, this convention was codified. Typesetters kept capitalizing I because that's what manuscripts did. But here's where it gets weird. Other languages faced the same clarity issue and solved it differently. They added accents, used different fonts, or just left it lowercase and dealt with it. English didn't. We kept capitalizing I, and over time this typographical quirk became associated with individualism, ego, self-importance. Some critics argue that capitalizing I reflects English-speaking culture's focus on the individual. Others say that's reading too much into it. It's just a convention. Either way, it's arbitrary. There's no grammatical reason for it. It's a medieval scribal solution to a readability problem that we've kept for 600 years. We're still capitalizing I because medieval monks had messy handwriting and decided that making one letter bigger would help, and English just never stopped. Let's talk about something that affects your inheritance, why we still favour the eldest child. Primogeniture, the system where the eldest child, usually the eldest son, inherits everything, is pure medieval feudalism. In medieval Europe, land was power. Dividing estates among multiple heirs weakened families. If a lord had 3 sons and split his land 3 ways, each son had less land, less income, less power. Within generations, the family would be irrelevant, so primogeniture became law. The eldest son inherited the title and the estate. Younger sons got nothing or small allowances. Daughters got even less, usually just a dowry if they were lucky. This kept estates intact. It maintained feudal power structures. It ensured that noble families stayed wealthy and influential. It also created massive inequality and family resentment. Younger sons had to find their own way, often joining the military or the church. Daughters were married off to secure alliances. The eldest son got everything just for being born first. Most countries have abolished primogeniture legally. You can divide your estate however you want in your will. But culturally, it persists. Family businesses still pass to the eldest child. Farms stay with the firstborn. Even in modern families, there's often an expectation that the eldest will inherit the family home. Why? Tradition. The idea that someone needs to carry on the family name. The assumption that the eldest is more responsible, more prepared, more deserving. Is the eldest child actually more capable? Not statistically. Birth order has minimal impact on competence, but the cultural bias remains. And in some places, primogeniture is still law. The British monarchy uses male preference primogeniture, recently updated to absolute primogeniture, where sex doesn't matter. But birth order still does. The eldest child becomes monarch, regardless of capability. This creates situations where an incompetent eldest child inherits power, while more qualified younger siblings are passed over. In business, it's worse. Studies show that family businesses passed to the eldest child based on tradition perform worse than those passed to the most qualified heir. But families do it anyway. We're still privileging firstborn children because medieval lords needed to keep their estates intact to maintain feudal power, and families decided that continuing an arbitrary birth order hierarchy is more important than merit or fairness. Now let's talk about something that affects your creativity. Why copyright lasts so absurdly long? Copyright law, the idea that creators own their work for a limited time, is rooted in medieval guild monopolies and royal privileges. In medieval Europe, if you wanted to print books, you needed permission from the king. The Stationers' Company in England, a guild of printers, had a monopoly. They decided who could print what. This wasn't about protecting authors. It was about controlling information and enriching printers. The first real copyright law was the Statute of Anne in 1710. It gave authors rights to their work for 14 years, renewable once for another 14 if they were still alive. 28 years total. That's reasonable. It allowed creators to profit from their work. Then the work entered the public domain where others could build on it. But copyright duration has been extended repeatedly. In the US, it's now life of the author plus 70 years. For corporate works, it's 95 years from publication. Why? Corporate lobbying. Disney, specifically. Every time Mickey Mouse was about to enter the public domain, Disney lobbied Congress to extend copyright. The Copyright Term Extension Act of 1998 is literally called the Mickey Mouse Protection Act. This isn't about protecting creators. Walt Disney died in 1966. Extending copyright to 2023 didn't benefit him. It benefited the Disney Corporation, and it harms culture. Works that should be in the public domain, available for anyone to adapt, remix or build upon, are locked away. Imagine if Shakespeare's works were still under copyright. No modern adaptations, no West Side Story, no The Lion King, which is Hamlet. Culture builds on itself. Copyright was supposed to encourage that by ensuring works eventually became public. But now, nothing enters the public domain. Works created in the 1920s are still locked up. By the time they're free, nobody cares anymore. Some argue this incentivizes creation. If you know your work will profit your grandchildren, you'll create more. But data doesn't support this. Most works make most of their money in the first few years. Extending copyright from 28 years to life plus 70 doesn't incentivize creation. It just enriches corporations. We're still locking up culture for a century because medieval printing guilds wanted monopolies, and modern corporations realized they could use the same legal framework to prevent Mickey Mouse from being free. Let's talk about something that affects your career. Why we still have professional licensing based on medieval guild models. Guilds, those medieval organizations of craftsmen, were powerful. They controlled who could practice a trade, how it was practiced, and what prices could be charged. Want to be a blacksmith? Join the guild. Want to be a baker? Join the guild. Want to sell shoes? You guessed it. Join the guild. Guilds claimed they maintained quality and protected consumers, but really they were monopolies. They limited competition, kept prices high, and enriched existing members. To join a guild, you needed to complete an apprenticeship, often 7 years. Then you became a journeyman. Eventually, if you created a masterpiece that the guild approved, you became a master and could train your own apprentices. This system controlled labour supply. If too many people became blacksmiths, wages would fall. So guilds made entry difficult. Modern professional licensing is the same system with a different name. Want to be a lawyer? Law school, bar exam, state licensing. Want to be a doctor? Medical school, residency, board certification. Want to be a hairdresser? In many states, you need hundreds of hours of training and a license. Some of this makes sense. You want doctors to be qualified. You want lawyers to know the law. But licensing has expanded absurdly. In some states, you need a license to braid hair, to arrange flowers, to be an interior decorator. These licenses don't improve quality. Studies show that stringent licensing requirements don't correlate with better outcomes. They just limit competition and raise prices, and they're barriers to entry for poor people. If you need to pay for hundreds of hours of training before you can legally braid hair for money, that's a massive barrier. Who benefits? Existing license holders. Just like guilds, they want to limit competition. Occupational licensing has exploded. In the 1950s, about 5% of jobs required a license. Now it's nearly 30%. This isn't about safety. It's about protectionism. Some states are reforming, recognizing licenses from other states, reducing requirements for low-risk professions. But most states haven't, because licensed professionals lobby to keep the barriers high. We're still using medieval guild monopolies to restrict who can work, because existing professionals realize that limiting competition is easier than competing, and politicians are happy to accept their campaign donations. Here's one that affects your identity documents. Why passports are still valid for only 10 years. The modern passport system is rooted in medieval safe conduct letters. In medieval Europe, travel was dangerous. Bandits, foreign soldiers, local lords who didn't like outsiders. If you needed to travel, especially across borders, you got a letter from your king or lord. This letter said, essentially, This person is under my protection. Don't harm them. It was a safe conduct pass. These were temporary, valid for a specific journey or a limited time, because identities could change, because alliances shifted, because the issuing authority wanted control. As nation-states formed, passport systems formalized. By World War I, passports were standardized, and they had expiration dates. Why? Security. A passport certifies your identity at a specific point in time. If it never expired, you could use a passport from when you were 20 well into your 80s. Your appearance changes. Your legal status might change. So, expiration dates make sense. But why 10 years specifically? That's arbitrary. Some countries use 5 years, some use 10, some use different durations for children versus adults. The 10-year standard emerged from international agreements in the mid-20th century. It was a compromise, long enough that people didn't have to renew constantly, short enough that security wasn't compromised. But in 2025, with biometric data, digital photos and databases that track every border crossing, do we still need expiration dates? Your fingerprints don't change. Your retina scan doesn't change. If your passport is linked to biometric data, it's valid indefinitely. Some countries are moving toward digital IDs and e-passports with embedded chips, but the 10-year expiration remains. Why? Revenue. Passport renewals generate billions in fees. Governments profit from the inconvenience. Also, security theatre. Making you renew your passport every 10 years feels like security, even if it doesn't actually improve security. And inertia. The international system is based on 10-year passports. Changing would require treaties, agreements, and coordination. We're still renewing passports every 10 years because medieval lords issued temporary, safe conduct letters, and modern governments realized they could charge you $130 every decade for the privilege of proving you're still you. Let's talk about something that affects your work. Why we still have non-compete agreements. Non-compete clauses, where your employer restricts you from working for competitors after you leave, are rooted in medieval apprenticeship contracts. In medieval guilds, apprentices signed contracts. They agreed to learn the trade, not steal secrets, and not set up a competing shop immediately after completing their training. This made some sense. Masters invested years training apprentices. They taught trade secrets. They didn't want apprentices to immediately become competitors. But the system was also exploitative. Apprentices were bound for years, often unpaid or underpaid, and restricted from using their skills freely. Modern non-compete agreements work the same way. You sign a contract saying that if you leave your job, you won't work for a competitor for 6 months, a year, sometimes longer. You also won't start a competing business. Employers claim this protects trade secrets and client relationships. But in practice, it traps workers. You can't leave for a better job in the same industry. You can't use the skills you've developed. You're stuck. And non-competes aren't just for executives anymore. Fast food workers, warehouse employees, and entry-level staff are being forced to sign them. What trade secrets does a sandwich maker have? None. But the non-compete... Let's talk about something that affects your work. Why we still have non-compete agreements. Non-compete clauses, where your employer restricts you from working for competitors after you leave, are rooted in medieval apprenticeship contracts. In medieval guilds, apprentices signed contracts. They agreed to learn the trade, not steal secrets, and not set up a competing shop immediately after completing their training. This made some sense. Masters invested years training apprentices. They taught trade secrets. They didn't want apprentices to immediately become competitors. But the system was also exploitative. Apprentices were bound for years, often unpaid or underpaid, and restricted from using their skills freely. Modern non-compete agreements work the same way. You sign a contract saying that if you leave your job, you won't work for a competitor for 6 months, a year, sometimes longer. You also won't start a competing business. Employers claim this protects trade secrets and client relationships. But in practice, it traps workers. You can't leave for a better job in the same industry. You can't use the skills you've developed. You're stuck. And non-competes aren't just for executives anymore. Fast food workers, warehouse employees, and entry-level staff are being forced to sign them. What trade secrets does a sandwich maker have? None. But the non-compete keeps them from working for a competitor, which reduces their bargaining power. Studies show that non-competes reduce wages, limit job mobility, and stifle innovation. Workers can't move to where they're most productive. Startups can't hire talent. Some states have banned or limited non-competes. California bans them almost entirely, and Silicon Valley thrives because talent can move freely. But most states still allow them. Why? Because employers lobby hard. They claim non-competes are essential for protecting investments in training. But training isn't a gift. Employees earn it through their labour. And if training makes employees valuable, maybe employers should pay them more instead of restricting their freedom. We're still binding workers to medieval-style apprenticeship contracts because employers realised they could use the legal framework to prevent employees from leaving, and courts decided that's fine. Here's one that affects your religion: why we still have blue laws restricting Sunday activities. Blue laws, regulations that restrict commercial activity on Sundays, are directly descended from medieval Sabbath laws. In medieval Christian Europe, Sunday was the Lord's day. You went to church. You rested. You did not work, conduct business, or engage in recreation beyond what the church approved. This wasn't optional. It was law. Violating the Sabbath could result in fines, public penance, or worse. The Puritan colonies in America were especially strict. In colonial Massachusetts, you couldn't travel, cook, shave, or even walk leisurely on Sundays. Everything was about God. As America secularized, most blue laws were repealed, but many remain. In some states, you can't buy alcohol on Sundays. In others, car dealerships must close. Some counties prohibit hunting. Some cities restrict when stores can open. The laws are inconsistent and arbitrary. You can buy beer, but not wine. You can buy a car part, but not a whole car. The original justification was religious. Give people a day of rest. Encourage church attendance. But that's unconstitutional. The First Amendment prohibits establishing religion. So modern justifications changed. Blue laws are now defended as protecting workers, ensuring a day off, and preserving quality of life. But they don't actually protect workers. Retail workers still work weekends. They just work Saturday instead, or they work at stores exempt from blue laws. And quality of life? That's subjective. Some people want to shop on Sundays, some businesses want to operate. The real beneficiaries are existing businesses. If car dealerships are closed on Sundays, they all lose a day of sales equally. Nobody gains a competitive advantage. It's a cartel enforced by law. Many states are repealing blue laws, but they persist in others, defended by business lobbies and nostalgic voters who like the idea of a quieter Sunday, even if it doesn't actually achieve that. We're still restricting Sunday commerce because medieval Christians wanted to force church attendance, and modern businesses realized they could use the same laws to avoid Sunday competition. Let's talk about something that affects your housing: why property taxes are still based on assessed value, not actual sale price. Property taxes, the annual fee you pay for owning land, are rooted in feudal obligations. In medieval Europe, if you held land, you owed the lord a portion of its productivity. This could be crops, labour, or eventually money. The amount owed was based on the land's value. But how do you determine value? In medieval times, it was subjective. The Lord's assessor would estimate based on size, location, and productivity. This created opportunities for corruption. Friendly assessors undervalued allied estates. Hostile assessors overvalued enemies. Modern property tax systems are similar. Your property is assessed periodically. The assessment determines your tax. But assessed value is not market value. It's an estimate. And it's often wrong. In some areas, homes are underassessed. Owners pay less tax than they should. In others, homes are overassessed. Owners pay more, and assessments don't update frequently. In some jurisdictions, properties haven't been reassessed in decades. A home bought in 1980 for $50,000, now worth $500,000, might still be taxed based on an outdated assessment. This creates inequality. Long-time residents pay low taxes, new buyers pay high taxes. Why not tax based on actual sale price? Some jurisdictions do. When you buy a home, it's reassessed at the purchase price. But this creates different problems. It penalizes people who move. If you buy a home for $500,000, you're taxed on that. Your neighbor who bought 20 years ago for $100,000 is taxed on that, even though the homes are identical. California's Proposition 13 locked in this system. Property taxes are based on purchase price, with small annual increases. If you never sell, your taxes stay low forever. This is massively regressive. Wealthy long-time homeowners pay minimal taxes. Young families buying homes pay exorbitant taxes, and it reduces housing mobility. People don't downsize or move because they'd lose their low tax rate. A fairer system would be regular, accurate reassessments at market value for everyone. But that's politically impossible. Homeowners vote. They like low taxes. Politicians who propose reassessments lose elections. We're still using medieval subjective land assessments because feudal lords needed to tax peasants' productivity, and modern homeowners realized they could freeze their tax rates by never selling. Now, let's talk about something that affects your justice. Why witnesses still swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. The witness oath, that formal promise before testifying, is rooted in medieval trial procedures. In medieval courts, testimony was sacred. Lying under oath wasn't just perjury, it was a sin. You were swearing before God. The oath was designed to compel honesty through fear of divine punishment. If you lied, you'd go to hell. That was supposed to be a stronger deterrent than legal penalties. The phrasing, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, is medieval legal redundancy. Medieval lawyers loved repetition. It sounded formal and binding. The truth means don't lie. The whole truth means don't omit important details. Nothing but the truth means don't add falsehoods. It's the same thing said 3 ways, because medieval legal language was verbose. Modern courts still use it. Before testifying, you raise your right hand and swear or affirm to tell the truth. Does it work? Not really. Studies show that oaths don't significantly increase honesty. People who plan to lie will lie. People who plan to tell the truth will tell the truth. The oath is theatre. It creates solemnity. It marks the transition from informal conversation to formal testimony. But it doesn't actually compel honesty. What compels honesty is the threat of perjury charges, which exist independently of the oath. Some jurisdictions have simplified the oath, some allow affirmations for non-religious people. But the core ritual remains. We're still making witnesses swear elaborate medieval oaths because courts believe divine punishment was the ultimate deterrent, and modern legal systems decided that continuing the ritual makes testimony feel more serious. Let's talk about something that affects your entertainment. Why theatres still have no recording policies rooted in medieval performance rights. In medieval Europe, performances were ephemeral. A play, a song, a story. It existed only in the moment. There was no recording technology, but there were performance rights. Troubadours and minstrels had exclusive rights to perform certain songs or stories. If someone else performed them without permission, it was theft. Guilds of performers controlled who could perform what. If you wanted to stage a play, you needed permission from the playwright or the guild. This made sense in a world where copying a performance meant memorizing it and performing it yourself. Then came recording technology. Suddenly, a performance could be captured and reproduced infinitely. This terrified performers and venues. If people could record shows, they wouldn't need to attend live. Revenue would collapse, so theatres, concert halls and venues banned recording. No cameras, no audio, recorders, nothing. This policy made sense in the age of bootleg cassettes, but in 2025 everyone has a phone, everyone can record, and yet venues still ban it. You'll be ejected from concerts for filming. Broadway shows prohibit phones, movie theatres threaten lawsuits. Some of this is about copyright. Performers and producers own the rights to their work. Unauthorized recording is infringement, but some of it is about control. Venues want to control the experience. They don't want clips on social media. They don't want people watching through phones instead of being present. The irony is that social media clips generate publicity. Artists who allow recording often see increased ticket sales. Fans share clips and others get interested. But many venues haven't adapted. They still treat recording as theft, rooted in medieval performance guild monopolies. Some artists are embracing it. They encourage recording, create phone-free sections for people who want immersion, and recognize that in 2025 fighting recording technology is futile, but many haven't. Because the instinct to control and restrict inherited from medieval guilds is strong. We're still banning recording at performances because medieval minstrels wanted to control who could perform their songs, and modern venues decided that continuing to restrict audiences is easier than adapting to technology. Finally, let's talk about something that affects your childhood. Why schools still have detention. Detention, the practice of forcing students to stay after school as punishment, is rooted in medieval monastic discipline. In medieval monasteries, monks who broke rules faced penance. This often involved isolation, prayer, and reflection. You'd be sent to your cell or a chapel to contemplate your sins. The goal was spiritual correction through solitude and boredom. When formal schools emerged, often run by the church, they adopted similar practices. Misbehaving students were isolated, made to sit in silence, and sometimes assigned extra prayers or scripture copying. This evolved into detention. You misbehave, you stay after school, you sit in silence, you reflect on what you did wrong. Does it work? Not really. Educational research consistently shows that detention is ineffective. It doesn't improve behavior. It doesn't teach better choices. It just punishes. Let's talk about one more thing that affects everyone. Why we still consider 18 the age of adulthood. The concept of a specific age marking the transition from childhood to adulthood is medieval, rooted in feudal coming-of-age traditions and canon law. In medieval Europe, there was no universal age of majority. Different aspects of life had different thresholds. For boys, the age of knighthood was typically around 21. This was when you could hold land independently, make binding contracts, and participate fully in feudal obligations. But you could start military training at 7 as a page, become a squire at 14, and fight in battles well before 21. For girls, the picture was different. Canon law set the minimum age for marriage at 12 for girls and 14 for boys. Noble girls were often betrothed even younger, though the marriage wouldn't be consummated until later, in theory. The number 21 became significant in England under feudal law. When a lord died, if his heir was under 21, the estate went into wardship. A guardian controlled it until the heir came of age. At 21, you could inherit fully and make your own decisions. Why 21? Partially because it was 3 groups of 7 years, and 7 was considered a mystically significant number in medieval Christianity, partially because it was roughly when male nobles completed their military training, partially arbitrary. This 21-year threshold became enshrined in English common law for things like voting, signing contracts, and property ownership. America inherited this system. The age of majority was 21 for most purposes until the 1970s. Then came the Vietnam War. Men as young as 18 were being drafted, sent to fight and die, but they couldn't vote. The slogan, "Old enough to fight, old enough to vote," gained traction. The 26th Amendment, ratified in 1971, lowered the voting age to 18. Most states followed by lowering the age of majority to 18 for other purposes. But it's inconsistent. You can vote at 18. You can join the military at 18. You can sign contracts at 18. But in most states, you can't drink alcohol until 21. You can't rent a car from most companies until 25. Your brain isn't fully developed until around 25. So why 18? It's not based on biology. Neuroscience shows that brain development, particularly the prefrontal cortex responsible for decision-making, continues into the mid-20s. It's not based on maturity. Some 16-year-olds are more mature than some 40-year-olds. It's based on medieval feudal inheritance law, filtered through 1970s Vietnam War politics. Different cultures have different ages of majority. In some countries, it's 16. In others, 21. In Japan, it was recently lowered from 20 to 18. Some argue we should raise it. If brains aren't fully developed until 25, maybe that should be the age of majority. Others argue we should lower it. If teens can work, pay taxes, and be tried as adults in criminal court, they should have full adult rights. The current system is arbitrary, a medieval inheritance rule adjusted for political expediency, now applied universally. And it creates weird situations. You can join the military and kill people at 18, but you can't have a beer. You can vote for president, but can't rent a car. You're an adult for some purposes, but not others. A more logical system would recognize that adulthood isn't a switch that flips at midnight on your 18th birthday. It's a gradual process. Maybe driving at 16, voting at 17, full legal majority at 19, alcohol at 20. The specific ages matter less than acknowledging that development is gradual, but we won't change it, because 18 is law. It's settled. It's tradition. We're still considering 18 the age of adulthood because medieval feudal heirs could inherit estates at 21, and American politicians subtracted 3 years during a controversial war. So there you have it. Even more weird medieval rules we still follow, often for no good reason. We measure in feet because of royal body parts. We wear neckties because of Croatian mercenaries. We switch our forks between hands because Victorians wanted to look fancy. We work 5 days because medieval churches controlled the calendar. We measure land in chains because oxen ploughing distances became law. We call judges "Your Honour" like they're feudal lords. We pay bail like medieval villagers pledging for neighbours. We protect postal monopolies rooted in royal surveillance. We list references like guild apprentices. We give kids summer break for harvests that don't exist. We have middle names to appease saints. We bless sneezes to ward off demons. We use juries because trial by fire was worse. We perform property transfer rituals at weddings. We sign HOA covenants like feudal obligations. We swear Hippocratic oaths to Greek gods. We carry coins that cost more to make than they're worth. We tip to subsidise wages that restaurants refuse to pay. We lecture students like medieval monks reading scrolls. We sign documents with squiggles instead of using encryption. We shout oyez in courts like town criers. We toast drinks to avoid poisoning. We swear on Bibles for spiritual accountability. We pay feudal rent tributes up front. We fine people for late library books. We capitalise I because scribes couldn't read their own handwriting. We privilege firstborn children like feudal heirs. We lock up creative works for a century because of printing guilds. We restrict professions with guild-style licensing. We renew passports on arbitrary schedules rooted in safe conduct letters. We bind workers with apprenticeship-style non-competes. We restrict Sunday commerce for religious reasons we no longer acknowledge. We tax property using medieval assessment methods. We make witnesses swear triple redundant oaths. We ban recording at performances like medieval minstrel guilds. We punish students with monastic isolation. These aren't traditions, they're inertia. Medieval solutions to medieval problems carried forward because changing is hard, and admitting that we've been doing something pointless for centuries is harder. And here's what's really fascinating. When you look at these rules, patterns emerge. First, many survive because they benefit powerful interests. Tipping benefits restaurant owners. Professional licensing benefits existing professionals. Copyright extensions benefit corporations. Blue laws benefit established businesses. Non-competes benefit employers. The medieval origins are often forgotten or reframed. Nobody defends tipping by saying, "This is how we exploited freed slaves." They say, "It rewards good service." Nobody defends excessive copyright by saying, "This is a corporate monopoly." They say, "It protects creators." The original purpose is laundered through time. What was explicitly about control and exploitation becomes about tradition, quality, or protection. Second, many survive because of sunk costs. We've built entire systems around these rules. Switching to metric would require changing every road sign, every textbook, every tool. Eliminating coins would require retooling vending machines and parking meters. Changing property tax systems would require reassessing millions of properties. The investment in the current system is so massive that changing feels impossible. So we don't. We keep maintaining systems we know are broken because starting over is expensive. Third, many survive because they've become identity markers. Speaking English means capitalizing I. Being American means using feet and inches. Being a professional means wearing a tie. Being a proper citizen means standing for judges and swearing oaths. These practices signal membership. They separate insiders from outsiders. Changing them feels like losing something essential, even when that something is just an arbitrary historical accident. And fourth, many survive because the harm they cause is diffuse, and the benefits of changing are unclear. Yes, bail systems hurt poor people, but most people never get arrested. It doesn't affect them personally. Yes, late library fees are aggressive, but most people don't use libraries. It's not their problem. The status quo has concentrated benefits. Bail bondsmen profit, library administrators feel in control, and distributed costs. Poor defendants suffer, low-income families avoid libraries. Changing requires organising the many harmed people against the few powerful beneficiaries. That's hard. So change doesn't happen. But here's what gives me hope. These systems do change. Slowly, incompletely, but they change. Some countries have eliminated pennies. Some states have banned non-competes. Some libraries have eliminated late fees. Some schools have abandoned detention. Some businesses have eliminated tipping. Change is possible. It's just hard, and it requires us to ask a simple question. Does this rule serve us, or are we serving it? If a tradition makes life better, keep it. If it creates community, preserves something valuable, or brings joy, keep it. Toasting before drinking, harmless and fun, keep it. But if a tradition causes harm, creates inequality, or persists only because that's how we've always done it, question it, challenge it, change it. We don't owe allegiance to medieval rules just because they're old. We don't have to keep doing things the way they've always been done. The medieval period ended 500 years ago. The world has changed. We have electricity, antibiotics, and the internet. We've split the atom and landed on the moon. We can handle switching to metric. We can manage paying servers actual wages. We can figure out how to tax property fairly. The only thing stopping us is the weight of history and the comfort of familiarity. But history is just stories we tell ourselves about the past. And comfort is just resistance to change. If we can recognize that these rules are arbitrary, that they're accidents of history rather than eternal truths, we can choose differently. We can build systems that actually work. Systems based on evidence, efficiency and fairness. Systems designed for the world we live in, not the world that existed when peasants ploughed fields and lords collected tribute. The medieval world is dead, but its ghost still haunts our laws, our customs, and our daily lives. Maybe it's time for an exorcism. Maybe it's time to stop measuring distance in royal body parts, stop strangling ourselves with obsolete military accessories, stop forcing kids to sit in silent rooms as punishment, and stop pretending that arbitrary historical accidents are sacred traditions. Maybe it's time to admit that just because something is old doesn't mean it's good. Maybe it's time to build something better. The tools are here. The knowledge is here. The only thing missing is the will to change. And that ultimately is up to us. We can keep living in a world shaped by medieval rules, explaining to our children why we do things in bizarre, inefficient ways because that's tradition. Or we can acknowledge that the medieval period, for all its fascinating history, is over. We don't live in that world anymore. We don't have to follow its rules. We can honour the past without being imprisoned by it. We can respect tradition without being enslaved to it. We can choose to build a world that makes sense for the people who actually live in it. The choice, as it always has been, is ours. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the medieval rules that still control modern life, hit that like button and subscribe for more historical content that makes you question everything you thought was normal. Drop a comment letting me know which medieval rule you'd eliminate first. Imperial measurements, tipping, detention, HOAs. The options are endless, and I want to hear which one drives you the most insane. And if you know someone who's always wondered why we do weird things for no reason, share this video with them. Let's start some conversations. Let's question some assumptions. Because at the end of the day, the only traditions worth keeping are the ones that actually serve us. Everything else? Just medieval ghosts we haven't bothered to exorcise yet. See you in the next one.